Today I'm speaking with Derrick Day. Derrick, thank you so much for joining me today.
Good to be here, Tim.
And I appreciate your time. And Derrick, I'm going to give you just a brief bio, and then you can tell us a little bit more about yourself. And this is going to be one of our shorter interviews, by the way, just for the sake of time constraints. But Derrick is from Detroit, Michigan, and now lives in Arizona. So I appreciate you working with me on the time zone difference there. It's pretty early as we're doing this for you. He's the husband of Angela and the father of 5 sons. So you've got a busy house.
Yeah.
And he studied IT at Old Dominion University and has worked in IT consulting and management for many years. He's a speaker, a teacher, an author, a leadership coach. He's been a newspaper columnist and a radio talk show host in Virginia. He's also a veteran of the U.S. Navy. So thank you for your service. Really appreciate your working for our country there.
You're welcome.
And you're also an author, and this is where we're kind of connecting here. You are the author of quite a few things. You've got a blog, which I'll mention here. I'll put a plug for that. What is your blog called, by the way?
Love Minus Religion on
Love Minus-
pathos.com.
Okay, I'll have a link for that. And you also have a YouTube channel where you do a lot of chats. You do talks and you do chats with other people. You also are on other people's YouTube channels a lot, kind of talking about these topics. But the books that we wanted to talk about today are, you're the author of a book called Deconstructing Religion,
Yep.
and you're also working on other books as well. But you were involved with a book called Before You Lose Your Mind, Deconstructing Bad Theology in the Church. Is that correct?
Yep, that is correct.
Awesome. And so I wanted to just kind of ask, for the sake of time, if you could just tell us a little bit more about yourself for what I don't know about you. And then could you tell us more about your work, your books, and kind of what brought you up to write them?
Well, there's not much more than that that I put out in the public space about myself. As you can see, I'm wearing one of my coaching shirts. I've coached youth sports for a lot of my adult life because I coached all of my kids and I coached other kids, and I coached them up to the point where I can't coach them anymore, and I turn them over to someone better. So very involved with youth sports, very involved with community activism, with things like Black Lives Matter, for example. And what got me started on the path to writing Deconstructing Religion was there were what I saw were inconsistencies in between Christian teaching and what was in the Bible. And and it kind of started me down a path, down a rabbit hole, if you will, that that caused me to rethink everything. I'm an engineer by profession, and so one of the things that I do is I try to find out how things work. I'm really fascinated by how things work, and when I was a kid, and even a young adult, and as an adult, I take things apart and I find out what makes them tick. For example, I have several MacBooks around here in different states of tear down and repair, where I'm kind of looking at how I can improve each one of them because they're older ones, right? So anyway, that's pretty much it. But I began to reverse engineer the Bible, and when I reverse engineered it as far as I thought I could and began to reassemble the different components of it, I found out that that what made it work is largely smoke and mirrors.
That's fascinating. Now, you're, just for clarification, you're still a theist, is that correct?
And you know what? Actually, I would say at this stage in my life, I'm tending toward atheism.
Okay, interesting.
I do believe in some intelligent design. There's too much evidence for intelligent design to discount it. But as far as like the God of the Bible, or a God that interfaces with humanity, that sort of thing, I'm just not there anymore.
Gotcha. Now, you're just for the brief introduction you just gave to yourself and to your books. I've got so many questions, and I think our time constraints will keep me from asking all my questions, but that'll be good. We'll do a follow up maybe down the line when time
Sure.
allows. But there's a lot of us who have begun to do this. We're at different stages. Obviously, we're all coming from different backgrounds, and we're landing in different places. There's different train stops here, and as you know, I've landed in atheism. But for a lot of people, no matter what your ending goal is, at least wherever you are right now, there's just a starting point that's often very difficult to do. For a lot of people, it's an issue of bravery, where they know that if they even begin to question things, and maybe they don't even know that, like I didn't know when I began to question things that it was going to lead me to atheism. I would have laughed if someone said, you better stop it, you will be an atheist. I would have said that's just, there's no way.
Same thing, same here.
Yeah, there's just, I mean, number one, there's got to be a reason that there's something rather than nothing. There's got to be an origin. There's got to be a, prime mover, someone that hit the first domino. There's got to be something. And like you said, there's things about design that look like, that we have some kind of designer behind us. And so I would have laughed it off. There's no way atheism is where this is going. But I began to ask questions. Mine in particular started with the genocide and land theft issues, slavery issues. But other people's, go to different issues like, kids in the hospital ward with dying of cancer, or, comparative mythology. So we all start at different points, but whatever starting point you have, it often like takes your breath away to think, what the hell am I doing? Like, I'm questioning God in the Bible. How did you get through that when you first started to do that? And like, were people challenging you and saying, get back in your place, of honoring God, bow your knee to the word of God. It is inerrant. It's infallible. Don't be questioning God. His word, he's the judge. He'll judge you. You don't judge him. How did you get over kind of saying, no, my place is not to just obey everything that everyone's telling me, but my place is to actually become the judge of some of this information?
Well, I'll tell you, I'll be perfectly honest with you. I think that the big catalyst for me was the 4 years of Donald Trump.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, because there were some things that happened. Like I just couldn't believe that that my evangelical friends, my pastor friends, that they bought into this. It was like, just, I was really incredulous. And what happened was, I would start speaking out about political issues, and so I was in what they call the grace camp, and my fellow grace teachers would say, "Oh, Derrick, don't talk about social justice and politics and all of these things. Just give it over to Jesus, pray about it, and let God work it out." And I started thinking to myself, I said, okay, when did Jesus actually work it out? I mean, for the Native Americans that had converted to Christianity, and they were dying of smallpox, and they were being moved off their lands, and they were being slaughtered. Where was Jesus then? And then I think about slavery, and my great grandfather was born a slave, and he had that experience, and he shared it with us as children. And I thought to myself, I said, okay, so where was Jesus when people were dealing with slavery? Where was he then? And then with Jim Crow, where was he then? And so on and so forth. My cat, he wants to.
Yeah, the Holocaust, and on it goes.
The Holocaust, yeah. And so all of these people that cried out to God, and I thought, and then this really kind of culminated with George Floyd, because when George Floyd was being murdered, before he died, he called on Jesus, and then he called on his mother, and then he died, and Jesus didn't save him. And so I started looking at all of these things, and then some with police brutality against Black folks in America, which is it's a long-standing thing. It's just that smartphones and social media make this apparent to a lot of people. And I would speak out on this, and they say, "Oh, Derrick, don't talk about Black Lives Matter and these kind of issues. Just give it over to Jesus and let Jesus work it out." So then I said, okay, I'm really kind of tired of this, because this is very patronizing. And so I said, I'm going to engage in a little thought experiment. And I put a post on social media, on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram, that used the word fuck. And these same people that were telling me to give my social and political concerns over to Jesus are now attacking me frontally. And I said to myself, I said, so my thought experiment has proven that Christians have more concern over the word fuck than they do over Black folks being murdered. And to me, that was astounding. And
Hmm.
when you look at how the Bible has been used, how it's been weaponized, people have used this book that's ostensibly the intermediary between God and man, the owner's manual, if you will, for all things God and man. They were using this as a tool of subjugation, as a tool of oppression, as a tool of manipulation and control. And I began to look at this, and let me say this too, like Luke chapter 9. And Jesus is James and John are preparing for Jesus to preach in Samaria, and they can't find a place for him to say, because the Samaritans were upset because Jesus had his mind fixed on Jerusalem. He kept looking to Jerusalem instead of looking to their mountain. And so Jesus is, really agonizing over this, because he knows what he's about to go through ostensibly. And so James and John say, hey, Jesus, how about we call down fire from heaven and smoke these fools just like Elijah did? And Jesus said, you know not what spirit you are of. For the Son of Man has come to save men's lives and not to destroy them. So that became a a hermeneutic for which I examined every single thing of the Old Testament.
Hmm.
And what I found was that the God of the Old Testament could not possibly have been the God of the New Testament.
Hmm.
Impossible.
Yeah.
And more to the point, that anybody who tried to conflate the Old and the New Testaments, that this was an error, this was a theological error, and that basically this God of the New Testament honestly wasn't really a whole lot better. It's just that Jesus was a uh, how can I say, a kinder or softer rendition of it.
Yeah.
But
In some ways.
yeah, in some ways. And when I took it all in total, I said, you know what? This makes no sense. I
Hmm.
mean, this was spun from whole cloth, and it is absolute bullshit. And
Hmm.
when I got to that conclusion, I wanted to say, okay, well, I still believe in God and I still believe in the Jesus narrative, but it's like the more I began to examine this, I just came to the conclusion that this none of this is real, none of this is substantive, none of this is worth any consideration.
Hmm.
And so now I'm at the point where it's like, fuck Christianity, fuck the Bible, fuck Jesus, fuck it all.
Hmm.
That's where I am.
It's really interesting that you started with the idea of people being nitpicky about um, things like language, but they'll be willing to overlook massive cultural injustices. It reminds me of the Old Testament God, where He says, don't mix two kinds of fabric. Make sure you're
Mm.
doing all these little tithes, and a lot of bizarre stuff like genital mutilation. But then when it comes to the big stuff, like go in and slaughter everybody, but save the young girls for yourselves, and have slaves that you're allowed to beat, those things, he's like, yeah, I'm not only okay with it, I actually command you and I'll prescribe how to do it, right? And it's like,
Oh,
wait a second, this doesn't make sense.
listen, let me throw this out here, because this was another one too, like pro life. And I was pro life. I used to be on the front lines, picketing abortion clinics, all of that stuff, right?
Ditto.
But when you look at the Bible, there is nothing about the quote unquote sanctity of life. Nothing. And as a matter of fact, if you were to actually uh, reach a conclusion logically, that you would say that God is actually not just pro choice, but pro abortion, because God Himself ordered the ripping of children from the wombs of women.
Yep. Over and over.
And when I saw, I mean, that kind of the whole pro life and abortion thing, that was literally like the last straw for me.
Yeah. And you're you're bringing up so many good things so quick. I can tell that any interviews we do, we're gonna be hitting on the big stuff quick. When you look at the Bible too, you said it talks about ripping open women, it talks about dashing children's heads against stones, but there's only one passage that specifically talks about abortion, just one. And I'm sure what they prescribe there. They
Mm-hmm.
talk about how to perform one, how a
Yeah.
priest can prefer. Do you want mind telling us if you remember what that passage it tells him to do?
Yeah, I think it's Numbers 5, where basically the priest is instructed to produce a potion that is given to a wife that is under suspicion of infidelity, and if she drinks the potion and the baby aborts, then she has been unfaithful. But if the baby survives, then 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 the wife is faithful.
Hmm.
But it's a causative.
Yeah, and it's literally made from like the dust. It says of the floor
Mhm.
from the floor of the temple, and
Exactly.
the one time that God could stand up and say, "Look, I'm going to make it crystal clear. Don't ever hurt a baby." He
Hmm.
instead prescribes exactly how to do it. And one of the less about a baby, but just about protecting your children. The whole Abraham and Isaac story has always fascinated me because you have this supposed culture where they're going to honor God and Yahweh and they're going to protect their kids, but
Hmm.
everyone else is supposedly sacrificing their kids to idols, to appease their false gods.
Yeah.
So the one time that the real God supposedly has a chance to say, I want you all to be completely different. Well, what does he do with Abraham and Isaac? He says, hey, Abraham, go kill your son. And yes, he does at the very last minute say, stop. But wouldn't it be amazing, such an amazing example for Abraham to say, no, God, I will never kill my son. But
Right.
instead, and I've even asked Christians, even some of the closest people to me in my life who are still very much fundamentalists, I've said, would you obey God if God said you must kill them? And for example, another example would be the stoning. If your child, presumably in a more of a teenager or young adult child, but if your
Hmm.
child was repeatedly belligerent and disobedient to you as a parent,
Hmm.
you're commanded to take him to the elders of the city and to make your case and then to begin the stoning yourself. Would you throw a stone? And the answer they gave me, to my horror, was, of course. You can't disobey Yahweh. Like, why would you even consider not throwing the stone? Of course I would do it if Yahweh told me to, if I was in that time. And you just sit there and think, I mean, pardon me for saying it, but what the hell's wrong with you people? You're talking about killing your own kids for the sake
Yeah.
of a pretend God. And the funny thing is, and this is a bit of a side note, but I wanted to ask you: did you get into, as you were beginning to dive into this stuff, just the whole comparative mythology part of it, and even just the strict origins of it? Like when we talk about Yahweh,
Hmm.
we're often talking about like Yahweh, the Lord, the capital Lord, but in the bigger history of like the archaeology that we're discovering that Yahweh was the son of Elyon. And
Right.
originally, Elyon had a wife named Asherah. Yahweh was one of many sons. And then
Hmm.
eventually they merged them and they're the same. And Yahweh had a wife named Asherah. And then
Hmm.
she gets taken out of the picture. But like, we're talking about people who are willing to kill their own children to obey Yahweh if he commanded it. And they don't even know where their God came from. Did you dive into
Right.
some of that stuff as you
Oh,
began to?
absolutely. If you look at the Epic of Gilgamesh, if you look at the Bhagavad Gita, if you look at the Egyptian Book of the Dead, if you look at the mythologies of ancient Greece, you'll find that basically it's the same story. As as the old Dragnet theme said, the names are changed to protect the innocent, kind of thing. That's pretty much it.
Yeah.
It's all the same thing. And so when you begin to look at this, and the Epic of Gilgamesh is really um, is really key in this discussion, because when historians look at the history of humanity, a lot of credence is given to the contributions of um, the Sumerians. But when it comes to religion, they kind of backpedal it a bit. They walk it back. So I'm thinking to myself, I said, okay, why is language okay to study with them, and things about law and finance and mathematics and science overall? Why is it okay to consider, to bring all of these things into consideration, but exclude the whole religious component of it? And the reason that is that if you were to include the religious component and treat it with the same scholarship, and also the same uh, scholarly publishing, that enough people would get it and juxtapose that with the Bible for comparative purposes, and basically shit can the Bible. And but the Bible is very profitable. It's profitable to leaders of nations. It's profitable to the institution we call the church. It's profitable for manipulation and control. All of these things, and so that's why. Uh, so yes, absolutely. I went down those rabbit holes as well, and basically, if you look at Jesus, Jesus can be compared to Horus. Jesus can be compared to Krishna. Jesus can be compared to Buddha. Jesus can be compared to Hercules. So there are all of these this archetype of the virgin born savior.
Yeah. And it's amazing too when you mentioned the Sumerians as being a major part of the story, and that just that whole history of and certainly we could wrap Egypt into a lot of that. But
Yep.
when you look at the New Testament, a lot of people seem to really be, and I say this including myself, a lot of Christians seem to be very just devoid of the context of the Greco-Roman period, where you're looking at all the things that were happening. And for example, people saw Homer's works almost as their Bible for a long time in the Greek world. And
Sure.
you had, Alexander the Great was known to literally carry a copy of Homer around with him to read as if it was his Bible. And when you really dive into this stuff, and I don't know if you're familiar with the YouTube channel Myth Vision, but do you know Derrick Lambert and Myth Vision?
I've heard that name, but I need to check him out.
It's fantastic as my plug for it. He's absolutely amazing. He has great guests, but they talk about this mythology, and Dragons and Genesis is another one that really does a stellar job. But when you look at this stuff, you begin to realize that they're like in terms of the Greek context, they're literally taking Homer's stories and also some from Euripides, from the Bacchae, and from Virgil, and they're taking the stories and they're rewriting a lot of them. I mean, for Homer's, for the Iliad and the Odyssey, they're doing a huge amount of it in Luke and Acts, but
Mhm.
even in the other Gospels. And then I was looking at how the astrotheology comes into it, where I'm familiar with Bill Darlison and the zodiac and the Gospels, but the Gospel of Mark, if you dive into it and if you know the zodiac constellations really well, you'll see it's in the Gospel of Mark in the right order, and you're like, oh
Wow.
shit, they're using all kinds of stuff. They're copying from this story, that story, the water into wine, straight out of Dionysius stories. Luke 20, or I'm sorry, John 21 with the 153 fish, straight out of Pythagoras, and his magic numbers. It's just,
Wow.
you're like, they're taking all this stuff. And I went to Bible college to be a pastor. I went to mission school to be a missionary. Nobody ever said a single word about it. And I mean, did you have people? Were you familiar with textual criticism or anything like that when you were going through your ministry and preparing to be a pastor?
No, because here's the thing: I didn't take the traditional route of being a pastor.
Okay.
I don't have a what you would call a formal theological background.
Hmm.
I was well studied. Again, being an engineer, I want to understand how things work. And so, what I used to do with scripture is I used to play a lot of what I would call connect the dots, right? And and you basically connect the dots to make something that doesn't really make sense.
Hmm.
Um, and that's pretty much what I did. So I'm listening to you and I'm listening to the scholarly work that you're citing, and I'm like, wow, I said there's a lot more because honestly, I'm I think I consider myself to be like the least of scholars when it comes to the Bible, but I know enough to know that it doesn't stand up under any real scrutiny.
Yeah.
And that's, and again, when I reached that point, I said, okay, we're done here.
Yeah. I think this is a really good point to bring up this question. The idea that it's a phrase I use a lot, the phrase scope for the imagination, but it's
Mhm.
almost like a lot of us when we were in it, we just couldn't imagine that the narrative of how this, like of what it is and how it got created could be different than what we were told as the party line. The party line being God breathed it, into his word through holy men who were carrying his message, and that it was exactly as he intended, and it's his love letter to us basically.
Sure.
And so this whole scope for the imagination to say, well, what if it wasn't from a god? What if it was just men? And that brings up, why is it always men writing it? Why are they writing 99.9% of the Bible? Where are the women? And what happened with church history? Were there people that maybe dominated it and dominated the story. And all of a sudden, when you dig in, I'm sure you've studied this stuff, but you find out that there's like 40 or 50 gospels, maybe more. There's 6 different books of Acts.
Sure.
There's at least 9 different endings to the Gospel of Mark. You're like, there is a whole bunch of other stuff here. And one of my favorite things I've been so just entranced by recently is the Book of Enoch. I remember growing up thinking, reading like in Jude, where it quotes the Book of Enoch, thinking, okay, there's one quote of Enoch in Jude, because he actually says, I'm quoting Enoch.
Hmm.
But as I've dove into the Book of Enoch, I realized there's at least 100 quotes in the New Testament right from the Book of Enoch. And I'm like, and then they find out the Ethiopian church, they've never lost the Book of Enoch. It's always been in their canon. You're like,
Right.
why are people, and then you find out the Revelation used to be off the list, and then they, a long time later, the church council switched and said, no, let's include it. Ezekiel, I believe, was out of the equation for a long time, and they let it back in. All of these books, and certainly we know about James with both the early church fathers, even up to Martin Luther, saying James shouldn't be in there because he talks about works. There's just men arguing about what their worldview is, and yet we inherit it. And does it ever like shock you that people can't imagine maybe this isn't what we were told it was? Like, not just a little bit, like maybe we should
Hmm.
shift our theology from here to here, but maybe the whole worldview is wrong. And like that's what we want
Yeah.
everyone else to do it. We want Mr. Muslim, we want Mrs. Hare Krishna, we want everyone else to say, will you please admit you might be wrong? Please admit it and come back to Jesus, to the
Right.
evangelical Jesus. You all could be wrong. Can you please just put it on the table, at least for theory's sake? But we never do it ourselves. Does that ever
Right.
shock you that we, like, it's like an arrogance issue, really? You know what I mean?
It is. And when I began to study the early church, the church fathers, and the history of the canonization of scripture, that was another revelation, because my question has always been, what remained on the cutting room floor? You're going through this, you're
That's a good way
you're
to put
you're
it.
deciding what actually goes in, what stays, what goes, and you have a lot of dross, right? And all of that's on the cutting room floor. Well, who decided what went in and what didn't? And so there's a whole branch of theology that's dedicated to how scripture was assembled. And so they talk about how the scholars came about their decision of what to include. But what's not discussed in those conversations is what was actually left out. Now we're told that there are certain things that are left out, and those are the things that we know. But there's a lot, like you said, that was, when you say like 60 gospels. Okay, so we know about things like the Gospel of Thomas and the Gospel of Mary, and now the Gospel of Judas. So we know about all of these, but again, 60, that's a huge number. So that means that not only is there stuff that we didn't know went in, there's stuff that we were not even told about at
Oh,
all. And so now modern scholarship and modern archaeology and uh, just modern science is helping us to unearth all of these missing parts.
hmm.
And now we get to the point where, okay, now you look at this and you say, okay, this could not have been God breathed.
Yeah.
And let me just hang my hat here for a second. In the Gospel of Judas, basically, the way Judas Iscariot is portrayed in this gospel is that he's the only one who actually knew what Jesus's mission was. That the other disciples, because it said Jesus came upon the disciples and they were praying, and Jesus started laughing at them, and he said, "Why?" They asked him, "Why are you laughing?" And he says, "Because of this God that you're praying to, you're going to find out that that's not the real God."
You bring up the point of all these other books, and it makes you wonder. Number one, did they burn some of them? Were there 100 gospels? And what others are we going to find? Is there going to be another Dead Sea Scrolls, archive that we find somewhere where there is another list of them? But it makes you really realize this was like a literary device. This was like a story people were writing. I mean, they did it. It was very common in that day you would take Homer's work and you would rewrite it with a twist on it. You'd make a different story, but you take some of his concepts and you take it a different direction. And
Hmm.
then you see them doing exactly that in the Gospels, where they take Homer's work and they rewrite it and they take it in a different direction. But then there's other people doing the same thing to the Gospels, saying, let's take the Gospels, and not that they were necessarily the originals, but they're taking them in a different direction. And it does make you wonder if this is just a big literary device. Like, this is a parable, not from a god, but this is a parable that people wrote to
Hmm.
try to explain, whether it was, the very esoteric stuff or the journey of the soul kind of thing, whether it was people trying to say, this is a picture of you, put yourself in Jesus' shoes, you're becoming
Hmm.
God, or whatever it was. But the idea is that they're trying to explain their worldview through these stories, and the story, of course, evolves because you've got different people speaking into the equation. As you began to think through that stuff, I've got to ask, did you get some pushback? Because even if you were just asking some of those questions, it's kind of straying from the party line enough that some people are going to say, are you really a Christian anymore? And did you get
Hmm.
that kind of response from people?
Oh, absolutely. It's funny because when I first started, I started studying. I think that I really um, grew in demand as a revivalist. I used to do a lot of itinerant preaching, and the reason why I was so loved was because of my scholarship.
Hmm.
That I was going into the deeper things of God. But then I would go into deeper things, and I remember one time there was a church that I had preached at 4 times, and after the fourth time, um, the pastor told me, says, you can't come back here anymore.
Hmm.
Um, and basically, you go far enough down the rabbit hole, far enough outside the reservation, and eventually somebody's going to begin to question your faith. I'm going to say something to your listeners, that if you're still in Christianity, and there are people that are in different stages of deconstruction and different stages of the faith walk and all of that. And I'm not knocking anybody that's still in Christianity. I just say it's not for me. But if you get to the if you're going through this, and if you don't at least flirt with the concept of there is no God, you really haven't deconstructed far enough.
Hmm.
If you get to that point, and you make a conscientious decision to remain Christian, well, good on you. But that wasn't my testimony, and it's not the testimony of a lot of others. But the thing is, this is where I am right now. Is that if humanity is going to evolve into its next great thing, that evolution requires, demands the jettisoning of religion.
Hmm.
We simply cannot get there, because religion factionalizes. And here's there are 4,200 known religions in the world,
Hmm.
and of those, Christianity is one of them. But Christianity is further segmented into 42,000 known denominations. So basically, you have a 10-to-1 bifurcation, and within those 42,000, there are sects within those.
Hmm.
Like, for example, the Church of God. The Church of God is a Church of God of Anderson, Indiana, and the Church of God of Tennessee. I forget what city in Tennessee. The Church of God in Christ, which is a major black denomination, has like 5 different factions. The
Hmm.
Baptist Church, I don't know, has like maybe 30 different
Yeah.
sects of, and on and on and on.
And they're all pretty
So
convinced that they're right on
that
target.
that they're the right one, you
Yeah.
know. And the thing is that, and then when you take Christianity and you juxtapose that with the rest of the world's religions, what you see is there's an I'm right and you're not kind of thing. And really, the two real guilty parties are Christianity and Islam in that regard, because Buddhism doesn't proselytize. Um, other religions, Hinduism doesn't proselytize. They just simply exist, and it's, I believe in my gods, you believe in your gods, and we're all happy people, right? And then Buddhism says, well, we're not a religion, and which you are, but they don't proselytize. But Islam and Christianity is basically, it's like convert or die,
Yeah.
right? And when you think about that, they are also the two biggest religions in the world, and Islam is the fastest growing. So the thing is that unless they have complete religious control, they're never going to be satisfied. And Christianity is always going to push back on Islam, and there will always be that division. But imagine a world where we set all of the divisions aside based on our theology. And I'm okay with you believing what you believe. It's when you export it beyond the borders of yourself that it becomes a problem, because once you export it beyond your own borders, now you're depending on the aggregation of numbers to make it stronger, to affirm your confirmation bias,
Mm.
and to grow this. And then that's where religion comes from. But if we just say, okay, I believe that the sky is red. Okay, great. As long as you're not trying to convince anyone, that's fine. If that works for you, if that helps you to live your life in a peaceful way, then good. But I really believe that the next evolution of human development, of human
Mm.
advancement, literally cries out
Mm.
for the abolishment of religion.
The way you describe that reminds me of the concept of detoxing from a drug. And I think it's fair to to say that religion can very much be an addiction for a lot of people, in the sense of like, you if you were a child and you were drawing and your parent says to you, hey, good job, you're doing such a good job, it literally creates like a feeling of like, oh, my parents just said I'm a great artist and I'm doing a good job, and it makes you feel good.
Mhm.
And if you do that enough, the child is like, I really want to get the praise of my parents or my teacher or my peers. I want to be known as the good, the person that's excelling. And when they do get that praise, it feels good in their endorphins and all that. Well, you export that exponentially to this God in the sky concept, where he's saying, hey, if you pray to me, if you go to church, if you tell people about the gospel, if you tithe, if you read my word, I'm looking down from heaven saying, I'm so happy with you, little boy, little girl. I'm the parent that's just so pleased with you. Well, now you've got this sky daddy who's just so, he can give you these spiritual endorphins, and it's like an addiction. It's really hard to break free from it, because you're like, it feels so good to know that somebody's watching. He's going to take care of me from start to finish,
Mhm.
and throughout the journey, he's saying, I got you, and I'm proud of you. Well done. And just to break free from that feels like you're pulling the carpet out from somebody, but it's like it's a detox. And I've interviewed a few people who have literally gone through real detox, and it's like they describe some of the parallels, and it feels like we're as a society detoxing from religion, and it's going to be painful, because some of us have gone had to do it cold turkey, and it's hard. It's very
Yeah,
hard.
it is. And when you look at religion, eh, let me let me say this. I have a unique perspective on life because I grew up in the inner city in Detroit, and I was raised by a single mom. And we had all of these negative influences. We had, drugs, prostitution, pimping, petty crimes, all of that. All of that was there. It's like on display. And the thing that I understand, two things. I understand the drug game and I understand the pimp game. I understand them both very intimately. And the drug game, basically, the successful drug dealer gives away his product until it reaches a saturation point, and everyone's hooked. Now they come back to him, they're looking for this next thing, and in order for them to get the next high, now they have to pay this guy. And they're going to do whatever it takes to pay him, because that's what has released the endorphins in their bodies, right?
Mm.
And then the pimp game is this, right? You take someone whose self-esteem is questionable, and give them some. You give them some self-esteem, you give them some edification, and then you go through a process of tearing down edification, of punishing and rewarding. And what you do is you get them addicted to that cycle. And at that point, they'll do anything for you because they come to believe that this dysfunction is actually the way things ought to be, and that the only way I'm going to get this is from this person.
Hmm.
And so when you understand that, if you understand the drug game, if you understand the pimp game, then you really understand how religion works. And when when you're looking at rescuing young girls and even young boys from human trafficking and prostitution, basically the first thing that you have to do is you have to detox them from this emotional roller coaster that they become addicted to, or you have to detox them from the drugs that they were addicted to in order to manipulate their mind and get them to do all of these heinous things. So yes,
Hmm.
religion is given away freely to children, and it's given away freely to them to get them hooked. And once they're hooked, they basically have a customer for life. And watch this. We go to elementary school for 6 years, grades 1 through 6. Then we go through 2 years of middle school, 7 and 8, and then 4 years of high school. And when we finish elementary school and go to middle school, we don't go back to elementary school for anything. We don't use those books, nothing. When we go to high school from middle school, we don't go back to middle school. We don't use any of that material. When we go from high school to college, we basically it's a foundation, but we don't use any of the high school texts. And then when we go to grad school, we don't use any of our undergrad texts. And ultimately, if when you reach the ultimate of formal education, where you reach a doctorate level, once you've reached a doctorate level, do you ever go back to the books? Do you ever go back to school? No, you don't. You eventually you graduate. Church is the only institution that we're never expected to graduate from.
Hmm. That's a
Uh,
great
we're, we're
analogy.
yeah, we're expected to be plugged into church for the rest of our lives.
Yeah.
Why? I mean, at what point do you know enough where you're able to operate on your own? At what point are you graduated? At what point do you become vocational in this?
Hmm. That's a great point. And it's like, as those of us who are deconstructing or who have deconverted, like myself, we're not necessarily, in a certain sense, leaving Christianity. We're graduating from it. We've moved on. To borrow a
Exactly.
biblical concept, we've left behind the childish things. We're moving on to become adults. And
Precisely.
I know we're almost out of time. Can I throw one last question to you?
Absolutely.
Progressive Christianity, or I'm sure there's other terms for it, but the idea of leaving behind the fundamentalism, the fire and brimstone, the literal hell, the flames, eternal conscious torment, even the strong emphasis on penal substitution. It sounded like for a while you were kind of in that camp.
Mhm.
Certainly, you've worked with some people and you do some interviews with people that are still, somewhere around that arena. Where are you now compared to that? And do you feel like you're still pulled to it? The people that would say, well, it's either annihilationism or eventually it's like a Rob Bell, God's going to win, love's going to win in the end. We're all going to be in heaven, and we just need to focus on God's grace. Or it sounded like where you started from, that maybe you're even like, if there was a train stop, that was one of your stops, but you've kind
Mhm.
of gotten back on the train, you've moved a little further. If that's fair to say, what is it like? What was it like in that group, and then what was it like to leave? Are they trying to pull you back and say, no, you're taking the escape from fundamentalism a bit too far? Yes, we don't want fundamentalism, but that doesn't imply we have to be atheists. How are they talking to you about these topics?
Well, I'm a bit of a candy connoisseur. And growing up, I used to love to eat M&Ms, and I remember when they came out with Reese's Pieces, and I was just really fascinated with those. But there was this one candy called Good and Plenty, and Good and Plenty were these pink and white candies in a box, and they had this really delicious candy shell on them. But what I discovered is that underneath the Good and Plenty candy shell was black licorice. And I don't know about you, but I happen to find black licorice disgusting. and and so when I discovered that as a child, I was so disappointed because good and plenty this candy shell, if you suck on this candy shell, it was just it was like a party in your mouth until you got to that black licorice, and it's like, oh my god, what is this? And then you know, when you look at
So,
M&Ms and you look at Reese's Pieces, it's like you have a candy shell. But the thing I love about M&Ms and Reese's Pieces is that in my mind they represent intellectual honesty, right? Because the candy coated shell is just a gateway to something that's even more wonderful, right? You get to the peanut butter or to the chocolate, right? Well, what I've learned is, and I'm going to say this, so this is going to sound very gross, it's going to sound very disgusting, but I'm going to say it anyway. That basically, progressive Christianity is like candy coated rabbit turds.
hmm,
You know, it's like it's beautiful and appealing on the outside, but it's nothing but shit on the inside. And you can, you know, you can flirt with the surface and and think that, hey, this is wonderful, this isn't old school fire and brimstone turn or burn Christianity, this is really loving, this is fun, it's like embracing and all encompassing, and you get really excited, but eventually you bite down on this thing and you find out that it's nothing but rabbit shit underneath.
hmm,
And that's what progressive Christianity is. And I was taken in by this, you know, that it's not about turn or burn. It's all about God's unconditional love and unlimited grace, and that God loves you and He has a wonderful plan for you. And God is not looking to destroy you, but He's looking to embrace you. And you fall into this.
hmm.
And man, I was preaching this faithfully for years. I got in the grace movement. I was in the grace movement for 7 years. And faithfully, I was preaching this. And then I realized that, okay, that and what I found was, I'm going to use one in particular, Joseph Prince. Joseph Prince had lured in millions of people with this message of grace. But then when it got right down to it, you know, people were like, okay, well, what happens when we die? And and Joseph Prince came back and said, well, you know, if you don't embrace God's unconditional love and unlimited grace, well, then you burn in hell. And people were just ah, you know, because they felt that they had been misled.
Yeah.
And here's the thing I get, and this is me. I have a Facebook page um, that has a lot of influence, a lot of reach. And people come to me all the time and they say, well, I've started following you because you were a Christian, and now you're not, you know, and how can you, you know, I feel like I feel misled, I feel dirty. And I said, no, you shouldn't feel that way. It's basically what I've done is I've grown.
Hmm.
I've evolved, and I've tried to take people along with me nicely, but now I don't really care about whether or not I'm being nice or not. I'm just going to simply say what I say and let the chips fall where they may. I just I don't care. And this is funny because I went through a phase where my average reach on an average week was about 50,000 people. And this is from a page with 14,000 followers. Um, but when I began to tend toward atheism, and this is a very recent development for me. I'm going to say this is the last 3 or 4 months
Hmm.
where I've really walked away from anything, you know, religious or anything spiritual, um, and went headlong into atheism. But when I started posting things that were decidedly atheist in nature, that number of people, the followers went up exponentially
Hmm.
to where it reached a zenith of 2.6 million
Hmm.
per
It sounds
week.
like you're hitting on some nerves of people who are
Yep,
looking for some better answers than what they've been given.
absolutely.
Hmm. That's awesome. Was there any final thoughts here as we wrap up? That I know I've got a lot of questions for next time, but was there anything you wanted to add to wrap us up for today?
You know what? I just want to say, people will tell you follow your heart. And I'll say this to you, that if you follow your heart, you're following it, an incomplete picture. Follow your heart and your mind. You have a mind to reason and to evoke logic with, and be sure that if you're following, and again, watch this, follow within, look within. Don't look for something external to follow or something external to latch on, because that's where religion begins. But if you look within, you're going to find all of the spiritual tools, all of the intellectual tools. You're going to find the springboard into the deep end of the pool of life. And that's where the party is.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, we've been talking today with Derrick Day. Derrick, thank you so much for what you do, for your voice in this. We really do appreciate all the things you contribute. I love when I see something pop through from your page. So keep at it. You're making a difference, and I think people are eager for better ideas, and you're bringing them to the table. And just this discussion is helping people to basically to find freedom. They thought they were free before, free of sin or Satan or whatever. Now they're realizing that they needed to actually be free from religion. And I
Yep.
really appreciate the way that you do that. You do it. Sometimes you have a little edge to it, but sometimes I think we need that. So thank you for what you do for the atheist community and for everybody that's in these discussions. Really appreciate it.
Cool. Thanks for having me, Tim. This has been a real fun ride.
Awesome. Let's do it again.
Absolutely. Soon.
Yes, sir. Thanks, Derrick.
All right. Cheers, man.